June 6, 1944, 0:15 hours. Strongpoint WN-62, Omaha Beach. Gerrit Hinrich Seau methodically wiped and polished the barrel of his MG-42 inside the concrete bunker overlooking the channel. In his pocket lay a letter from his girlfriend in Metzingen, swearing she would wait until the war ended in victory. In his mind, this invasion would become their grave. "We will drive them back into the sea within hours." He had written that to her just 3 days earlier, after Field Marshal RML himself had inspected the position. The Desert Fox had peered through Seau's firing slit, checked the interlocking fields of fire, and nodded, satisfied. "When they come," RML had said, "this beach will be their cemetery." Through the embrasure, Seau saw only calm darkness on the water. The night felt quiet, almost peaceful. Yet 12 hours later, the same young man would be found sobbing inside that bunker, surrounded by 13,500 spent casings, his gun barrel distorted by heat, staring at an invasion so immense his mind could barely accept what his eyes reported. Seau would later insist he had caused 1,000 to 2,000 casualties, but historians judge that claim impossible, given that total American losses at Omaha from all causes were roughly 2,400. The arithmetic of German defeat was about to be recorded not in staff papers or intelligence summaries, but in the stunned recollections of men who would watch the largest amphibious assault in human history from the wrong side of the sights. The Atlantic Wall ran for 20,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border, what German propaganda hailed as the most formidable defensive barrier ever built. Along the Normandy coast, 58 divisions of uneven quality held positions that had swallowed 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel. Hitler himself had called it unbreakable, and at Omaha Beach the preparations seemed to support that certainty. The U.S. Army Center of Military History notes the scale of the fortifications: 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery sites, 18 anti-tank gun positions, 45 rocket launcher locations, 85 machine gun nests, and 6 mortar pits. The shoreline had been engineered into a slaughter zone. In the tidal belt alone, 3,700 obstacles had been set: Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, and wooden stakes, many fitted with telemines. Farther inland, 6.5 million mines had been planted, though RML had demanded 60 million. Colonel Ernst Goff, leading the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux, had worked out the numbers for his sector's defensive fire. On paper, his 4 batteries could pour 120 rounds per minute into the beach approaches. Combined with neighboring batteries, the Germans believed they could focus overwhelming fire on any landing attempt. But those calculations quietly depended on one assumption: endless ammunition. That assumption would soon collapse. June 5th brought weather that Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stuber in Paris judged incompatible with an invasion. Winds rose to 20 to 25 knots. Waves reached 6 feet. Low clouds sagged around 500 feet. Using data from U-boats and weather stations, Stuber assured High Command the conditions would stay hostile for at least 2 weeks. With that forecast accepted as fact, senior officers dispersed. RML left for Germany on June 5th to mark his wife's birthday, carrying a pair of grey suede shoes he'd bought in Paris. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding 7th Army, ordered division commanders to attend war games at Rennes. Even routine naval patrols across the Channel were called off because of the heavy seas. That certainty in the forecast became the first German error. Stuber did not know the Allies had weather stations in Greenland and reconnaissance flights over the Atlantic. Assets that detected a brief break in the storm. A 36-hour opening identified by Group Captain James Stagg and seized by Eisenhower. At 23:15 on June 5th, radar stations along the Normandy coast began to register unusual movement. Freya and Würzburg radar picked up large aircraft formations coming in from the north. But the operators had seen similar patterns before. Allied deception strikes meant to keep Germany on edge. By 0:30 on June 6, however, messages arrived that didn't fit the old template. Paratroopers were coming down across Normandy, yet the reports were contradictory. Some units swore the landings were east of them, others west. Some claimed the troops were British, others American. Dummy parachutists, complete with firecrackers, part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, deepened the chaos. Major Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, was among the first to understand what it meant. Roused by word of airborne troops near his positions, he immediately asked permission to strike. The reply from division headquarters was blunt: "Do not move until the situation clarifies." Von Luck later wrote that as a panzer commander he knew in that moment they were finished, because the paratroopers were clearly shaping the flanks for a seaborne landing, and every minute of hesitation let them dig in and organize. But the German system froze itself in place. June 6, 0530 hours. As the first pale light spread over the Channel, forward observers began reporting something their training had never truly prepared them for. Verluscart, whose presence on the coast is disputed by some historians, including Seau himself, was credited in some accounts as one of the first to report the Armada. What is not in doubt is this: along the Normandy coastline, German eyes saw the sea filled from horizon to horizon. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Vessels of every size, from battleships to small landing craft, carpeting the Channel in grey. Official Allied figures put the fleet at 6,939 ships, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 support vessels, and 864 merchant ships. It was the largest naval armada ever assembled. For defenders raised on propaganda about Allied weakness and disunity, the sight was a psychological blow. Bernhard Furking, an artillery officer at WN 62 who would die later that day, reportedly told his men they were watching the entire world arrive at their doorstep. At 05:35, the naval bombardment began. Nothing in the German experience, not the Eastern Front, not the heaviest RAF raids, had prepared them for what followed. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells at Pointe du Hoc in just 34 minutes, according to Naval History and Heritage Command records. HMS Warspite, which opened fire on D-Day at roughly 0500, would deliver more than 315 15-inch shells over the first 2 days, including 96 rounds aimed at German positions on June 9th. The total weight of naval fire exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had previously endured. German veteran testimony, later collected by the German Federal Archives, describes concrete bunkers, built to resist any bombardment, splitting and cracking under the impact of naval gunfire. Men were entombed under collapsing earth, hauled out alive, and then buried again as the shells kept falling. The damage was not only physical, it was psychological. The defenses they had trusted without question were breaking apart like sandcastles. And as the naval guns continued to hammer the coast, the Luftwaffe's reaction exposed just how desperate the German situation had become. Oberst Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, received orders to strike the invasion fleet with his entire force. His reply, preserved in the wing's war diary, was brutally direct. What entire force? I have 2 planes. The Luftwaffe, which had promised to dominate the skies over any invasion, managed only 319 sorties on D-Day, against 14,674 flown by the Allies. U.S. Navy Office of Naval Intelligence records indicate that Priller and his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodacik, carried out the only Luftwaffe attack on the beaches that morning. A single strafing run over Sword Beach in FW-190A-8 fighters, before they were driven off by overwhelming Allied air cover. That lone attack, 2 aircraft darting in against an armada, became a symbol of German powerlessness. The Knights of the Air, who were meant to blacken the sky, had been reduced to a gesture. At 06:30, the first assault waves reached the sand. German defenders, battered but still in place, reoccupied their firing points and opened up. What followed was slaughter that stunned even men hardened by years of war. At WN-62, the machine gunner Heinrich Sau began firing at 06:35. His position, one of the few left largely intact, held commanding lines of fire across Omaha Beach. In his 2005 memoir, WN-62, Erinnerungen and Omaha Beach, he wrote that he fired 13,500 rounds over 9 hours. Sau claimed enormous results, but historians caution that while his post was lethal, it was only one element among many, and precise casualty figures cannot be confirmed. What is not in doubt is the effect of the MG-42 itself. Capable of 20,200 rounds per minute in controlled bursts, and its role in shaping what came to be called Bloody Omaha. The defenders began to experience what military historians later described as material shock, the mental fracture that comes from facing force on a scale the mind cannot absorb. However many Americans, British or Canadians fell, more kept appearing. Every landing craft destroyed was followed by 3 more. Every gun position that went silent was smothered by naval fire that seemed inexhaustible. By midday, German strongpoints were reporting severe ammunition shortages. Their defensive plans had been built around stopping a limited landing. No one had prepared for an attack of this magnitude. Wehrmacht supply records show positions stocked for a 3-day fight burning through their reserves in a matter of hours. Artillery, the backbone of the coastal defense, ran into the same crisis. Carefully rationed stockpiles disappeared under the pressure of combat. Efforts to move forward reserve ammunition collapsed as well. Every road came under constant attack from Allied fighter bombers. The contrast with Allied firepower became impossible to ignore. German observers noted that American destroyers would expend hundreds of shells against a single target, while by afternoon, German batteries were being limited to 4 shells per gun per day. Meanwhile, the Armoured Reserve, what RML had insisted must crush any landing at the shoreline, remained immobilized through the decisive morning. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armoured formation close enough to matter, did not receive orders to attack until 10, 4 hours after the first troops had come ashore. When it finally moved at 16:20, it advanced between British airborne landing areas toward the coast. Divisional records state that elements reached the shoreline between Leonare and Luc-sur-Mer around 1900. They were the only German armoured unit to reach the sea on D-Day. But at 2100, they saw the arrival of Operation Mallard, 250 gliders delivering reinforcements to the British 6th Airborne Division. Reading this airborne influx as a threat to their flanks, they pulled back. By the end of the day, the division had lost 54 tanks and armoured vehicles, around a quarter of its strength in a single day. The counterattack also ran into specialised Allied armour the Germans had never faced before. Hobart's Funnies, modified tanks equipped with flails for mine clearing, flamethrowers and bridging gear, seemed like weapons from a different kind of war. All day long, German units confronted something new in scale and intensity. Large airborne forces operating behind their lines. The British 6th Airborne and the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions created a level of disorder that multiplied their effective power. Aust Friedrich von Dieter, Germany's most experienced paratrooper commander serving with the 6th Falger Regiment, was in Normandy during the invasion. His judgment, captured in post-war interviews, was stark. The Allied airborne operation was everything theirs had not been. Massive, coordinated, and supplied. "We dropped battalions," he said. "They dropped divisions. We were supplied by single aircraft. They had endless streams of gliders and transport planes." The effect of paratroopers appearing everywhere paralyzed German reactions. Some units refused to move for fear of ambush. Others fired at shadows, sometimes even at their own men. Confusion compounded every existing weakness. As the day wore on, German command and control began to unravel. Allied aircraft targeted communications systematically. French resistance teams, activated by coded BBC messages, cut phone lines and destroyed relay stations. Allied electronic warfare disrupted radio traffic. Generalleutnant Max Pemmel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, tried to coordinate from headquarters at Lamar. His war diary records rising frustration as contact with forward units evaporated. By noon, entire divisions had effectively vanished from the communications net. Unit commanders made choices in isolation, blind to the wider situation. As darkness settled on June 6th, the surviving defenders confronted the reality. The impregnable Atlantic Wall had been pierced in multiple places. Over Normandy, the Luftwaffe had all but disappeared. The Kriegsmarine managed to sink one destroyer, USS Corey, but at the cost of 15 E-boats and many smaller craft. General Watton Wilhelm Richer, commanding the 716th Division that had absorbed the main weight of the British assault, reported to 7th Army headquarters, "Combat strength at 35%. All coastal strongpoints lost. Artillery 90% destroyed. Enemy pushing inland." The numbers told the story of tactical collapse, even as individual soldiers fought with courage. In a single day, German losses reached the level of a major battle, while the Allies continued to land fresh forces as though D-Day were only the opening act. Through the night of June 6 into June 7, German units tried to regroup and counterattack. Those attempts exposed the full measure of Allied superiority. Movements were spotted by radar, lit up by flares, and then shattered by artillery or naval gunfire. Hans von Luchs's Panzer Grenadiers, finally released to move, advanced towards Sword Beach in darkness. In his memoir, he recalled how parachute flares suddenly illuminated them, and how destroyers offshore immediately brought down devastating fire. It was as bright as noon. Every truck, every man stood exposed. The shells arrived from the sea with unnerving precision. Half our strength was gone without us ever laying eyes on a single enemy soldier. And while that destruction unfolded, Allied reinforcements kept coming ashore. The artificial Mulberry harbours were already taking shape. Supply ships lay anchored in orderly lines. The invasion was not merely surviving. It was hardening into something permanent. When German reinforcements tried to reach Normandy, they ran into total interdiction. Roads, railways, bridges, everything was under continuous attack. Wehrmacht transportation records show that formations expected to arrive in a single day sometimes required as long as 2 weeks. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, based near Toulouse, took 17 days to reach Normandy, a trip that should have taken 3. They arrived having lost 30% of their vehicles to air attack without firing a shot at ground forces. The psychological damage was severe. If they could not even reach the front intact, how could they hope to shape the battle? At the same time, Allied logistics moved with astonishing speed. LSTs, landing ships for tanks, put entire armoured regiments ashore in a matter of hours. Within days after D-Day, the Allies were unloading 15,000 tons of supplies per day, more than the entire German army in Normandy used in a week. By June 12th, German forces in Normandy were nearing psychological collapse. They had lost 26,000 men killed, wounded or missing, about the equivalent of 2 divisions, and replacements were scarce. Meanwhile, Allied strength grew by the hour. Carentan fell on June 12th, linking Utah and Omaha. The German paratroopers of the 6th Falsche Jager Regiment, elite troops who had never retreated before, pulled back in disorder. Their commander, Friedrich Fonder, reported upward, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit." The survivors are psychologically broken. On June 13th, SS Oberturmführer Michael Wittmann delivered one of the few German tactical successes in Normandy. British records credit him with destroying 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 to 15 personnel carriers at Villiers-Boëge in roughly 15 minutes. German propaganda seized on the episode as proof that German arms could still prevail. But even this victory underscored the larger futility of Germany's position. Wittmann's Tiger tank, disabled in the fighting, was replaced by the Germans only with great difficulty. British losses, by contrast, were made good within hours. Individual brilliance could not defeat industrial arithmetic. Wittmann, credited with 138 confirmed tank kills across all fronts, was killed on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed. Whether the fatal shot came from British gunner Joe Ines of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry or from Canadian forces remains disputed. Germany's greatest tank ace was eliminated by an opponent that could afford to trade 10 tanks for a single Tiger. Then came another blow, the fall of Cherbourg on June 26th. This major port, fortified over 4 years and defended by 21,000 men, was expected to hold for months. It fell after 5 days of serious combat. Generalleutnant Karl Wilhelm von Schleban, commanding the garrison, had vowed to defend Cherbourg to the last bullet. Instead, he surrendered on June 26th. In post-war interrogation, he said resistance became meaningless in the face of an enemy with unlimited resources, a refrain that would echo through German accounts of Normandy. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, delivered the decisive Udar. U.S. Army Air Force records state that the preparatory strike used 1,503 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers, dropping more than 4,100 tons of bombs onto a zone only 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep. Generalleutnant Fritz Bulliner, commanding a Panzer division, reported to Army Group B, "My division is annihilated." The psychological effect on the survivors is indescribable. They are no longer soldiers, but broken men. The bombing was so intense it killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater, who was observing from what was believed to be a safe distance. If American generals were not safe from their own firepower, what chance did German soldiers have? The Files pocket from August 12th to 21st became a mass grave for German forces in Normandy. Allied intelligence, later supported by post-war German records, estimates roughly 10,000 Germans died there and 50,000 were captured. More than 300 tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed, along with 2,500 other vehicles. German soldiers trying to break out described an apocalypse. Roads were littered with dead horses and burning wrecks. Allied fighter bombers struck in waves every 20 minutes. Artillery never seemed to pause. The destruction became so systematic that many men simply surrendered, choosing captivity over what felt like certain death. The final balance sheet of the Normandy campaign reads as a record of total German defeat. German losses from June 6th to August 31, about 320,000 casualties, 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, 210,000 missing or captured. Around 2,300 tanks destroyed, virtually the entire armoured strength in France. 2,127 aircraft lost. Allied losses: 29,672 casualties, with replacements exceeding losses day after day. Roughly 4,000 tanks lost, replaced within weeks. 4,011 aircraft lost, from a force of more than 13,000. The gap exposed a basic reality. Germany was fighting a material battle it could not win against an opponent with effectively unlimited reserves. Germany's professional officers offered the most unsparing assessments. General Diensttruppen Hinrich Aberbach, who took command in Normandy after Ramel was wounded, reported to OKW on August 1st. The enemy's material advantage was at least 20-1 in artillery, 10-1 in tanks, and total in aircraft. He could replace every loss within days. Germany could replace nothing. General Hanspeidel, Rammel's chief of staff, wrote in his 1949 memoir that Normandy proved courage alone could not defeat industrial supremacy. They faced an enemy that had mechanized not only war, but victory itself. and Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel left the starkest testimony. In his final report to Hitler on July 15th, 2 days before he was seriously wounded by Allied aircraft, he wrote that the troops were fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle was approaching its end. The enemy's crushing superiority in men and matériel was beginning to decide everything, and he begged Hitler to draw the necessary conclusions without delay. In the language of officers, this meant complete defeat. Germany's most celebrated commander was signaling that the war had been lost. Normandy revealed what World War II had become: a war of production. German soldiers saw American industrial power that defied their imagination. Ford's Willow Run plant alone turned out one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. American factories built 96,000 aircraft in 1944. In a single day, Allied ammunition expenditure exceeded German output for a month. And one American division consumed more supplies each day than an entire German corps. Hans von Luck, looking back in his memoir, wrote that Normandy taught them modern war was no longer decided by tactics or bravery, but by production. The Americans, he said, had made warfare an industrial system, victory built on assembly lines. For the German soldiers who lived through Normandy, the experience was psychologically transformative. What they had been taught about warfare, racial superiority and national destiny, was shattered in front of their eyes. Hinrich Sau, the WN-62 machine gunner, carried D-Day with him for the rest of his life. In his 2005 memoir, he described meeting American veterans of the landings and realizing they had all been young men fed into an industrial slaughterhouse. His 13,500 rounds, he admitted, meant nothing against an enemy that could replace men and machines without limit. Friedrich von Donder Heiter, the paratroop commander, became a professor of international law after the war. He wrote that Normandy proved the age of warrior heroes was finished. War had become a question of industrial capacity. And Germany, he argued, had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with horses and worn-out dreams. From the German viewpoint, D-Day was not simply a battlefield loss. It was an ideological and psychological collapse. Men who had helped conquer much of Europe discovered that nearly everything they believed about their enemies, their cause, and their opponents' capabilities was catastrophically wrong. They had expected weak, divided democracies. Instead, they met an alliance that had turned war into an industrial process executed with ruthless efficiency. They saw democracy's arsenal at work: ships, aircraft, tanks, and supplies arriving in seemingly endless quantities from factories whose output was beyond German comprehension. The defenders of Normandy learned that modern wars were not truly won on the shoreline, but in the factory. Not by the bravest soldiers, but by the most productive societies. They realized the Western Allies had rewritten warfare into a kind of mathematical problem, where production figures outweighed tactical genius. Hinrich Sau began June 6th, convinced the landings would be driven back within hours. He ended the day surrounded by mountains of spent casings, watching wave after wave of Allied reinforcements come ashore on the beach he was supposed to dominate. His story captured the wider German tragedy in Normandy: local lethality overwhelmed by strategic impossibility. Normandy's beaches became more than a battleground. They became a revelation. German soldiers saw the future of war, and it belonged to the societies that could build the most matériel and apply it with the greatest efficiency. They brought courage discipline, and determination. The Allies brought industrial abundance. Trying to stop that invasion, the defenders were effectively trying to stop the tide. They fired until barrels warped, fought until ammunition was gone, and watched as the Allies simply delivered more. More men, more ships, more shells, more everything. The logic of industrial war made their courage irrelevant. The Germans who faced D-Day absorbed the hardest lesson of the era. In industrial warfare, any nation that cannot match an enemy's output is destined to lose, no matter the skill or sacrifice of its soldiers. They began June 6th as warriors of the Third Reich, and ended it as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in its full, terrifying efficiency. Their defeat was not only military. It was total. A brutal demonstration that the Nazi promise of racial supremacy and unstoppable force had collided with Allied industrial power and broken apart. The invasion they had vowed to hurl back into the sea did the opposite. It swept them away, taking with it the last remaining illusions of German victory.